I still can't get what happened last week out of my head. I mean, it doesn't fit together at all. I haven't been able to get any rest for the past few days just thinking about it. So I figured I would just write it down here and see if you guys had any better luck explaining it. I work at a daycare. It's a pretty established place in a big city on the coast. That's all I can say. I still work there and I don't want anyone linking this post back to my employer. I'm not supposed to talk about anything that happens to the kids online. We mostly cater to the professional crowd. Busy people in finance and internet startups who don't or can't use an office daycare. It's a common sight to see someone in a business suit drop off a baby with a large cup of Starbucks in the other hand. People who can afford to blow $25 a week on coffee, go figure. One of the attractions was that we offered daycare for infants as well. A godsend for the jet-setting crowd in the city, I suppose. Lucy C was my favorite baby. Lucy's her real first name, which is all I'm prepared to share. We all have our favorites working in daycare. When you're faced with 4 screaming babies, you grow to like the quiet ones more than the others. Lucy C was as close to a perfect baby as you can get. She wasn't much of a crier, unless she needed to be changed. She went to sleep like clockwork. She had a crown of wispy blonde hair to offset her piercing cornflower blue eyes. Mr. C, as far as I could tell, was a self-made businessman. He ran one of those internet startup companies. I never caught what he did. And the 5-minute handovers in the morning really didn't make for startling revelations about his hopes and dreams. He always dressed sharply. I'm not one for chasing fashion, but some of the other girls who work here whispered designer labels that I had only ever heard of in celebrity magazines when they referred to his latest threads. He seemed genuinely pleasant, if a little distracted in the mornings. I had never seen a Mrs. C. There was an Abigail C. listed on the emergency contact form all parents had to fill out with our center, but she was listed as his sister. I know some of the others joked about whether he was on the market or not, so to speak, when they saw his sports car pull up to drop off little Lucy in the mornings. But that was just locker room talk. He was awfully wealthy though, successful in an ecosystem which chewed up and spat out 100 other young businessmen each and every year. Some kind of magic touch, the others said. I try and think back to that morning last week. Did Mr. C look strange that morning when he dropped Lucy off? I've replayed those 5 minutes over and over again in my mind these past few days. His suit was immaculate. He greeted me like he did with the rest of the staff, with a warm smile, a kiss for Lucy, and a request to take good care of his girl. Just about the same thing any of the other 20 or so parents would have said. Maybe there wasn't really anything wrong. I keep on thinking back because if things had gone differently, I might have been able to save Lucy. Shit. I don't know why I wrote that. Lucy is fine. Or she should be. I don't know why I can't get it out of my head that I made a terrible mistake. Why there's this guilt I feel when I check in at work and see Lucy's favorite toys on the playroom floor. The children were taking their afternoon nap after lunch. The bell told me that there was someone at the front desk. The other staff were busy with cleanup, so I went to go see who it was. We didn't have any early pickup scheduled, so I thought it might be someone making inquiries. My breath caught a little when I saw him. He was really good looking. Not your high school crush good looking. I mean, this guy looked like he was plucked straight out of a fashion magazine. He stepped up to the counter and flashed his perfect white smile at me. There was something about this guy, a terrible feeling in my gut, a dirty, shameful feeling. The kind of dirty that makes you feel like you'll never be able to scrub it off. It was like I was standing in front of pure evil. When the man spoke, he had a sort of radio voice. You know, kind of deep and smooth, and it fit him perfectly. Mr. C and I had an agreement. I'm here to collect Lucy. He didn't say that Mr. C sent him. He didn't even introduce himself. It was such a strange thing to say that I just stood there and stared at him for a minute, and he just stared back at me, his eyes twinkling with good humor from that devilishly handsome face. It was an odd request, but we do get third-party pickups from time to time. It's very, very rare, and we either need to be told in advance or be informed personally by the parents. Nobody had mentioned that Lucy was going to be picked up that day. I told the man that we couldn't do it unless we had authorization from the parents. He then smiled and told me that everything had been arranged. He gestured towards my personal cell phone on the table, and just then, the damn thing rang. I jumped. I was a bit more on edge than I should have been. This strange man was really making me nervous. He had this weird aura around him. It was intimidating. It was like I was totally undeserving of his attention. His stare made my breath catch in my throat. On the phone, Mr. C was odd. He didn't have my personal number. Hell, I didn't even have his number stored in my contacts either. It was a FaceTime call as well. I accepted the call and Mr. C's face filled the screen. But something was off about the call. At first, I figured it was the network connection. There was a slight lag. His lips were out of sync with his voice, like a badly dubbed film. "Hey, there's a guy over there with you, right?" Mr. C had an intense look of concentration on his face, and there was something else. There was a mark on his cheek. It was too small and too blurry on screen to make out exactly what it was, but I knew for sure it had not been there when he dropped Lucy off that morning. It seemed to be some kind of angular shape, about the size of a quarter. "Yes, there is, sir." I was mesmerized by the video feed. "You need to give him Lucy, okay? Just give him Lucy." There was something off. The movement of his lips didn't seem to match what he was saying. They seemed to be repeating the same thing over and over again. "If you say so, Mr. C, is there something wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Just give him Lucy. I'll be fine after that." I could see the slight parting of his lips and the slight roll of his tongue, repeated over and over. I looked back up at the man, standing there with a quiet smirk on his face. "I'll go get Lucy," I said. I slowly made my way back to the nursery. I thought about what Mr. C could have been saying on that strange call. I stayed over the crib where Lucy was sleeping. She gave a small gurgle of complaint as I scooped her up in my arms. The slight parting of lips, and the small tongue roll. It was like the second word he was mouthing was Lucy. Something Lucy. Did he even know the man at the counter? What agreement did they have? My mind was clouded with questions, but I had been given a direct instruction from the parent. Maybe there was a home emergency or something else. When I came back out with Lucy, the man beamed and drew closer to the counter. It suddenly smelled like smoke. I hadn't figured him for a smoker, with his perfect white teeth and toned physique. He reached out for Lucy, but I stopped short. "How do I even know that you're the man that Mr. C told me about? You could be anyone," I said defiantly, not intending to let her go without a fight. "Oh, Mr. C and I go back a long way. You could call me a godparent almost." His mouth twisted at the end of his sentence, like it had left a bad taste in his mouth. "I've been watching over her since she was a baby. Here, I'll prove it. She has a small birthmark on her left hip. Check and see." Checkmate. Lucy had no such birthmark. I placed Lucy on the table and tugged at her diaper, expecting to see pale skin. My mouth dropped open when I saw an angry red mark on her hip. It was the same mark that had been on Mr. C's cheek. Every time I tried to remember what that mark looked like, it just comes up as a blur in my mind. And that's the worst thing. I stared at it for a good 5 minutes, and I can't form the shape in my head when I try to remember it. "You seem reluctant, young lady. I assure you that no further inconvenience will befall you regarding this matter. The business is between me and little Lucy here." He leaned forward onto the counter. "It's a slow day. I suppose that you and I could come to a small agreement for the handover. The child needs to be given over willingly, and I'd hate for this to be delayed any further than it already has." I picked up Lucy and hugged her to my chest. She began to squall at the uncomfortable pressure. "I'll need to speak to my supervisor about this." The man sighed and straightened up. "I was really hoping to be done with this business this afternoon. No matter. What's due to me will come in the end. If not from you, then maybe from someone else more cooperative." I turned around to call my supervisor, but when she came out, I turned to the counter and the man was gone. Without so much as a chime from the door. He had been there a moment before, and there hadn't been a single noise when he disappeared. He left nothing but the faint smell of smoke and a freezing cold spot on the counter where he had rested his elbows. My supervisor, Jane, looked Mr. C up on the register and gave him a call from our counter phone. I watched, biting my lip. Her jaw dropped, and her face turned white. "You must be mistaken." She swallowed, and took a shuddering breath. After hanging up the phone, she turned to me. "That was the cops. Mr. C is dead. After dropping Lucy off this morning, he drove straight to his office and shot himself." I was in complete and utter shock. Jane managed to call up the emergency number from the register with shaky fingers and dialed Abigail C., Mr. C's sister. The cops weren't going to pick up Lucy. I guess they had better things to do. Abigail said that she would be on the next red-eye flight over to get Lucy, first thing in the morning. That left us with the problem of taking care of the baby overnight. Jane offered to pay me double to stay there overnight with Lucy, and I would get the next day off. It was a practical decision. None of the staff had small children at home, and it would be easier to leave the baby in a familiar environment, rather than move all the stuff to one of our houses. I had been given a couple hours off to grab an overnight bag and a shower. One by one, the rest of the staff said goodbye, until it was just me and Lucy. I had settled down for the evening. Dinner was some forgettable microwaved package out of the fridge. At least the place was set up for sleeping over. I couldn't shake off the feeling that there was someone else there in the center, apart from me and Lucy. The kind of feeling you get when the small hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. Something wasn't quite right. I chalked it up to the creepy encounter I had earlier with that man, and that bizarre FaceTime call. I checked on Lucy for maybe the 4th or 5th time. She was sound asleep. Sleep did not come as easy for me. Lucy's crying woke me up in the middle of the night. I rushed over to the next room and immediately checked her diaper. She didn't need to be changed. It was only after I blinked away the sleep from my eyes that I saw the indentation of a hand on the clean white sheets of her crib. A man's hand. I didn't have to touch it to know that it would be freezing cold just like the countertop, but I did anyway. It was almost like putting my finger on an ice cube straight from the freezer. I jumped as my phone rang in the next room. I looked at the number calling me. It was Mr. C. It took me 3 tries to hang up. My quivering finger kept missing the little spot on the touchscreen over and over. Immediately after I killed the call, my phone rang again, and again, and again, until I turned it off completely. I glared at it, chest heaving. Ever wonder what goes through your mind when nothing but ice is pumping through your veins? Nothing. That's what. Instincts take over. You look for an escape, but what was there to run from? The feeling that I was being watched by some stranger? The phone calls from a dead man? I turned on all the lights in the building. I didn't give a damn about the power bill. I felt trapped by those cheery pastel walls. I looked at the clock. 3 a.m. Another 3 hours until first light. Those were the longest 3 hours of my life. A knock on the front door woke me up. A tall, thin woman stood outside the glass doors of the center. She was dressed as if she was about to attend a funeral, black from head to toe. It was windy out, and I hurried to let her inside. She introduced herself as Mr. C's sister. Sensing my doubt, she showed me her driver's license and proved that her number was the one that we had on records. Lucy didn't complain when the lady picked her up. I got the release form ready and passed it over for the lady's signature. Everything checked out except for one thing. She didn't have a trace of sadness about her. She flashed me a smile as she pushed the signed form back across the glass counter. I watched her stride confidently back out through the glass doors. There was something out of place about Abigail. What's due to me will come in the end. If not from you, then maybe from someone else more cooperative. That's what the man said. There was a thud as the glass doors closed. The wind then whipped the woman's hair to one side. And there, red and raw on the nape of her neck, was that same symbol. By that time, I got out from behind the counter and out through the door, but they were both gone. It's been a week. Mr. C didn't have any family in town. The authorities didn't really bother us about Lucy. A detective did call to make sure that she had been handed over to the appropriate guardian, and that was it. When nobody was looking, I would try dialing both Mr. C's number as well as his sister's. The numbers were live for a day or so before they were disconnected. I've tried for hours to remember the symbol that was on Lucy's hip, the bizarre thing that appeared that day her father died, but I can't. I just can't. I've also thought long and hard what Mr. C was trying to tell me during that FaceTime call, and what I think he was saying was, save Lucy, but I can't be 100% sure on that. I wonder what kind of agreement the stranger had with Mr. C, and how Lucy fit into the whole thing. I hope she's alright, and maybe I'm just being paranoid, but I know deep down this is a lie that I need to tell myself if I'm to have some semblance of normalcy. But most of all, I try to forget the face of the stranger with the perfect smile, who made me feel shameful with one glance and those freezing cold hands of his. I sometimes lie awake at night, hoping that if I forget him, then maybe, just maybe, he won't remember me. There's always a reason.